Hello and welcome back. This is Roger Royce, host of the 10,000 Startups podcast. I'm an attorney with Haynes Boone in downtown Palo Alto, do emerging growth and venture capital. And today we're going to talk about something really topical, and that is the H-1B visa controversy that has kind of been raging through the news over the last few days after, I guess, a Twitter war with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and some other people on the other side of the issue, including Bernie Sanders. So today, however, we're going to hear from an actual immigration lawyer who does this on a day-to-day basis, every day, day in and day out, as to what this H-1B is all about. Is it really as bad as people say? Is there potential for abuse? How does it work? And who takes advantage of it? So my guest today is Stephen Malm. He's counsel in the Labor and Employment Practice Group in the San Francisco office of Haynes Boone. He leads our immigration practice group as well. He has vast experience in representing small, mid-size, and even large employers in a wide array of immigration and compliance, including H-1B, as well as other visas. Thanks for being here, Steve. And let's kind of kick this off. So there was a tweet by Elon Musk. He feels very strongly about the H-1B program. He's a big supporter. I believe he thinks it should be expanded. Donald Trump has taken his side in this and says, yeah, I agree. I've used a lot of H-1B workers, but I heard who's the person who's going to be the new Speaker of the House, probably Mike Johnson, say, well, yeah, but there's different H-1Bs. There's H-1Bs for tech workers and then for everybody else. And we've got a lot of people here that could use those jobs for everybody else. And I was just reading this morning that Bernie Sanders has weighed in, and he basically said, look, this is just a way for employers to get cheap labor. They have tremendous leverage when they bring an employee over on an H-1B visa because they're tied to that employer, and if they get fired, they get deported. And there's a lot of potential for abuse. So before we dive into the details and the mechanics, can you kind of weigh in on what the parties are saying about the broader policy issue here? Is it really as bad or as good as they say?
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks, Roger, for having me on. So yeah, I would say the debate has been very light on actual facts or understanding of the H-1B visa and how it works. Now, I think on the campaign trail, we saw Trump, and now he's really close with Elon Musk. And I believe there was a statement that they wanted to be more welcoming to quote unquote legal immigration and to, I believe, well, paraphrasing, to staple a green card to the diploma of any foreign graduate from a U.S. university with a bachelor's degree. And so I think there were clear statements on the campaign trail in support of legal immigration. And when we're talking about it, and this is probably the specifics were not mentioned, or the details of how our immigration system works. Actually, that rarely gets mentioned in any debate on immigration, frankly. But when you have a foreign graduate from a U.S. university, they're typically almost always on an F-1 student visa. And if an employer wants to hire that person, the next step is the H-1B visa. So people don't go right to a green card. A green card takes many, many years to get in most cases. And if you're from India or China, you're talking many years or even a decade if you're Indian. So the way to allow someone who has a U.S. education to get a green card or stay in the U.S. if a company wishes to hire them is to move to sponsorship for an H-1B. And that's the context in which we're in at this time of year in particular. We're approaching the H-1B lottery. And the issue has always been scarcity for those, really, because they only give 85,000 H-1Bs a year, and you'll have 400,000 applicants on average in recent years. When the economy is good, you're always going to have an excess of applicants for those 85,000 H-1Bs. And the issue has always been scarcity there. And a lot of people, it's a heartbreaking discussion I have to have with companies and valued employees that, sorry, you have to go home. You didn't get a number. It's 20% odds approximately to get the H-1B under the lottery, and people that don't get it, they're facing basically returning home and giving up on that American dream. And so that's the context in which I've dealt with H-1Bs, and they've been around since 1990. So they're not a new category. I just think it's become a polarized debate, and it's in the media because of some pretty bold statements that were made. I think it may be a category that has simply flown under the radar, and it's not a lot of visas a year. I mean, for a country our size, to give out 85,000 of these a year, it's really not a huge quantity. And the issue, from my vantage point, has always been scarcity. So I think the statements in support of H-1Bs that you've seen have really gone to that issue of there aren't enough for the talented people that the companies want to sponsor. They end up not being able to employ those people due to the lack of numbers. So that's been my experience. I think anytime immigration is brought up, there are different factions, I think, in our society, and there can be a legitimate position to take, that you want to favor hiring American workers, and you don't have to impute something more nefarious to anyone that takes that position. But the bottom line is this has been around. There's always been a debate about immigration, whether that's quote unquote legal or illegal immigration, and there's always been a significant constituency that has opposed even legal immigration. And I think that they got riled up by some of the statements, I think, from Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I think the statements were probably inartful in how they were made, and it just raised this entire furor over this visa that's really been around, and I think flying under the radar, and is quite effective for companies. And when they can get a number, it's a great way to retain talent and get the best and the brightest, is what I've seen.
Best and brightest. So let me just read to you what Bernie Sanders said, because you said something really interesting. You said you feel like maybe there's not enough of these. Yeah. Bernie Sanders says the main function of the H-1B visa program and other guest worker initiatives is not to hire the best and the brightest, but rather to replace good-paying American jobs with low-wage indentured servants from abroad. The cheaper the labor they hire, the more money the billionaires make. I heard you say something different. I think heard you say that really employers are having trouble finding American workers, and that's why they turn to the H-1B program. And I'm wondering, are we really talking about apples and oranges? Are we talking about, maybe in our world here in Silicon Valley, it's all about tech workers, right? It's all about tech. And maybe in other places, it's a different type of worker where we do have enough people in America. So can you just drill down a little bit on your comment about there may not be enough H-1Bs? Yeah.
So again, there's a quota every year, and it's 85,000 that they give out, and these are apportioned through a lottery, and this probably requires a little more just discussion of what the H-1B visa is and what the requirements are. So an H-1B visa is a quote unquote specialty occupation visa. So it's only for roles that require a bachelor's degree and not just a bachelor's degree, but a bachelor's degree in a directly related field. And in turn, anyone that is to benefit from an H-1B or receive an H-1B visa needs to possess that degree, whether it's a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree. So inherently, we're already into a narrow, range of jobs. It's not for unskilled jobs. I've seen a lot of misinformation about this visa in recent days. I saw something saying, look, the 7-Eleven worker, he was petitioned for an H-1B or something. And that just struck me as almost inflammatory, and certainly that would not be an H-1B qualifying occupation typically. It requires a company to sponsor someone for a role that requires at least a bachelor's degree. And what we've seen across the board, and so I think this is anywhere in the country really, this H-1B, to sort of use a crude term here, it's sort of a nerd visa. It's a tech visa. It's tech heavy. And it is largely going to individuals working in, software engineering occupations, or computer occupations. And so, I can understand, Bernie is coming, probably has his own bias built into, what he views. There's a protectivist or protectionist streak in both parties, political parties, and that might predispose someone to view it in a certain way. But the facts are that, the H-1B visa, these are highly compensated positions. I mean, this data is available online, easy to look up. And, what we're looking at, and so the kind of quintessential H-1B role that I think represents a large percentage of H-1B holders is software engineer. And when you file an H-1B, that's supported by a labor conditions application, or you could call it a labor certification from the Department of Labor. A company needs to agree to pay that person the Department of Labor mandated wage. And just to give you an idea, so if you're a software engineer with a bachelor's degree and 0 years of experience, if a company wants to hire you in Silicon Valley, namely the Santa Clara areas, they would have to pay $146,000 for an entry-level software engineer. And if you were to look up the data on the major sponsors for H-1B visas, you would see these are all six-figure jobs. For entry-level software engineers that are getting paid into the six figures because that's what's required by the Department of Labor. They publish the wages. So, they're not, it's hard for me to agree with the critique that these are low-paying jobs. I mean, I've seen it where companies have actually declined to sponsor H-1Bs, and maybe this is just the nature of my practice. I don't tend to represent these Indian third-party staffing companies, and that's their business model. But I've certainly seen it where companies will decline to sponsor an H-1B because they'll have to pay them more money than what they're willing to pay, and then they have to look for a U.S. worker. So that may be how it's supposed to work, and from the vantage point of a Bernie Sanders, because they're paying attorney's fees, filing fees. Filing fees, by the way, are not cheap. I mean, if it's $3,500 for the basic fees, but if you want to do an expedite, that's going to run up to $6,500, and that's just the mandatory government filing fees.
That's for each one?
Each one, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Holy cow.
And to enter the name into the lottery, so, we're entering the time of year now where companies may have done their on-campus recruiting or had students work for them over the summer, say on internships, while they're F1 students or on F1 student visas. And they're making the decision now, do we want to continue the relationship with this employee or, make it a long-term employment? And so they're evaluating H-1B sponsorship at this time. And even to put the name into that lottery hat, that $85,000 allotment annually, they have to pay a $215 fee to enter the name into the lottery. That went up from $10. And so just this year, it's taking effect for this lottery. The fee has gone up from $10 to $215. So,
Can you stop for a second? Can you tell me how that lottery works? Because that's kind of an interesting concept.
Right. And it's very timely in a way, this discussion, because we as immigration attorneys, we're entering our busy season. We always know from January to March, we need to understand from our clients, do they have any employees that are on student visas working? And by the way, that has a limit. You only get 1 year of work permit after you graduate, and 3 years if you're in a science, technology, engineering, maths degree program and working. So this is the time where they're thinking, do we sponsor someone? And so how it works is, and this process has changed also. And that was just a few years ago that they went to this they conduct a lottery without having you prepare and file a full-fledged petition or have a full petition ready and filed, and then they conduct the lottery. So you identify who you want to sponsor if you're a company. You pay this $215 fee, and these are, again, for specialty occupations and people that hold at least bachelor's degrees. And you enter them into this lottery, and it's been around 400,000 recently for these 85,000 H-1B visas. And the lottery occurs in March, and and typically the results are available within a week of submitting and paying the fee. But they put them all in together in March, and again, it's 85,000 visas. They actually have 20,000 of those are allotted to U.S. advanced degree holders, and then 65,000 to anyone that isn't a U.S. advanced degree holder. But the numbers have been not in the favor of applicants recently, so it's been a lot of bad news. I got to tell you, I have a lot of tough conversations after the lottery. Sorry, you didn't get your H-1B, and we're talking about really impressive folks a lot of times that are, basically that's could be it for their immigration journey in the U.S. So when I talk about that's how you see the scarcity. And I think it's probably that noble image of the H-1B that an Elon Musk is championing, and that has largely been my experience. And when someone doesn't get that H-1B, we start looking at, and there's another visa out there that you've heard in the conversation, the O1 extraordinary ability visa. So then it's like you're probably really reaching to try and argue that a person's extraordinary, but if they don't get the H-1B, we're often pivoting to, okay, could they get that visa? But that's a lot harder to get.
Gotcha. Okay, and then so it's a lottery, it's 85,000, and so are these all used up then early in the year? Are they all gone by April?
Great question. Yeah, so that's exactly right. So these are numbers that they only give 85,000 out a year, new H-1Bs. And so they're all apportioned basically in that March lottery. Now, there are some remaining numbers occasionally, if not everyone goes ahead and files the H-1Bs. So we've actually had lotteries conducted in the following months if there weren't enough of those initial H-1Bs used up because the company's, maybe circumstances changed. It didn't fall through on the H-1B filing, but those have been a very small number. But ultimately, it's capped at 85,000. And the start date for an H-1B it's really about your planning in advance as a company that's going to sponsor one, because the start date is not until October 1st of the same year. So you have your lottery in March, and then the H-1B takes effect in October, and then they get 6 years of H-1B time.
Okay, that was my next question, is how long are they good for?
And this is, I think, a really key point in this discussion as well, because, and I'll try to, again, take Bernie's sort of argument in good faith there, or point is and this is something companies consider and sometimes decline to do the H-1B because it's a 6-year maximum unless the company commits to a green card for that person. So basically these things will kind of go in tandem. Is you'll have someone on the H-1B a few years in, typically is when a company might say, this person's really great, we want to help them and sponsor the green card. And that's sort of the idea, is that the green card would eventually replace the H-1B if a company sponsors it. But it's a lot of fees for a company at the end of the day to get the H-1B initially, extend the H-1B because you get it for 3 years initially, and then you can get a 3-year extension to get your full 6. But to go beyond the 6, a company needs to sponsor a green card, and that green card process has to reach certain milestones. There's a filing. It takes about a year to navigate the Department of Labor process before you file the necessary application that then signals this person can extend their H-1B beyond 6 years. And so, Roger, what ends up happening is there are 2 countries that are really oversubscribed. And when I say oversubscribed, is there are more applicants than there are green card numbers. And this is really interesting. A nuance in our system is there's no per country quota on H-1Bs. Yet you have 75% of the applicants for H-1Bs are coming from India, 12% from China. So basically 90% of the H-1B visas are going to nationals of 2 countries. But then the green card system says only 7.5% can come from one specific country. So you have, basically, it's like if you're at the toll booth, right? And this is India. It's got this huge wide lane, and it narrows down into this tiny little lane. And so Indian nationals end up waiting more than a decade to get their green card. If you're from another country that's not India or China, you're looking at a 1 to 2 year wait for your green card. So a company has very much less leverage over, say, someone from one of those other countries than India. because they're all trying to narrow it down into that green card. And so while they're waiting for the green card, they're extending their H-1B beyond the 6 years, but it's decades before they're getting it. And even their children are here in this H-4 dependent status that runs out when they turn 21. And so that becomes its own issue. What happens when the children turn 21, and do they have to go to India? And so you might say there's this whole awareness of this visa, how this visa system works, probably among Indian nationals on H-1Bs that the broader public doesn't really get, or they're just hearing, about this visa maybe for the first time. But that's been the situation for Indian nationals, and which have comprised a large, heavy percentage of H-1B holders, and how there could be increased leverage. Now, so to address that point, though, about the leverage and also maybe the Bernie statement is you're actually able to move employers when you have an H-1B. The key is getting accepted under that lottery of 85,000. Once you've secured your H-1B number under the quota, now you're under that. You've now been counted under the cap, and you have quote unquote portability. You can port over to a new employer. So they don't exactly have leverage over you. You're free to move to another company so long as they agree to file the H-1B transfer paperwork for you. It's pretty easy, frankly. It's not an onerous thing to do to file an H-1B transfer.
Now that's really interesting, because certainly out there in the internet ether, people are saying that there is no portability, that, if you get fired, you get deported, you're stuck with one employer. But what you're telling me is that's not necessarily true.
That's right. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's a big part of my practice to file these H-1B transfer petitions. So just, so you can see kind of a concrete example of that, company reaches out, say, hey, we've got this applicant. Do you know anything about this H-1B visa? They had it on their resume. We think they're really great. Do you do H-1Bs? I say, sure, I'll be happy to help with that. It's a really straightforward transfer process. You need to post a notice at the work site that in 2 locations tells the wage to other people, so they can see it at the work site. You file a 7-day application with the Department of Labor, and then you get the company's signature on the filing, and the pretty simple supporting documentation, and you're able to file it within, say, 10 days of a company reaching out and saying, we'd like to transfer this person over to us. So it's really straightforward. An employee who has come far in their green card process, then they could be giving up the green card process through that prior company. So it adds an additional burden to the new employer when they transfer over, because now they have to redo green card paperwork potentially. And I could see an employee being reluctant to leave once they've already got kind of their green card petition or spot in line reserved. But that can easily be undertaken again by the new employer.
Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else that we should know about the H-1B before we close? Because we're getting towards the bottom of the hour here. Right.
Well, obviously I do a lot of H-1Bs, and I've seen it work out really well for my companies. I don't think the ones that I've done, I don't view as exploitative in the least. I mean, they're paying really, these are great jobs. I could see how someone would be jealous of these jobs, frankly. They can be very high paying. But I could rattle off a litany of statistics, I guess, in support of kind of what H-1B immigrants bring to the U.S. But I did see something. It's hard to avoid this popping up in your Twitter feed lately, and especially when I'm probably Googling or my feed knows I'm an immigration lawyer, so I get fed a lot of immigration. But there was one stat that really stuck out to me, and that was in the U.S. for high school students, there's a Junior Nobel Prize. So it's the top science award for high schoolers in the U.S. And of the nominees for that award, I think it was in 2016 was the year that they cited, but 83% of the nominees for the Junior Nobel Prize were children of H-1B visa holders.
Oh.
So, I mean, this is a visa. Certainly, you can see the immediate holders of this visa, but there's just, a value on education that I think when you think about the people that have risen to the level in a country of over 1 billion in India, that, there's a real draw to coming to the US. And to be one of those few of the country of over 1 billion that gets, not accepted by a company that, hey, we'll do this paperwork for you. We'll expend all these fees to let you come to the US. It's almost a reward. It's not just the average employee that's getting this benefit that they can come to the US. So it's really viewed as an opportunity for H-1B holders. And, these are people that they're definitely contributing to our society. I think no one can argue them. And even now we can see with that statistic, their offspring.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, this certainly sheds some light and adds some clarity to the issue, Steve. And I really want to thank you for explaining the H-1 process and especially your experience with it, in the face of all the sort of theoretical worlds that have been created online about the program. So this has been H-1B visas, the controversy. This is Roger Royce with the 10,000 Starts podcast. I've been speaking with Stephen Malm, an immigration lawyer at Haynes Boone. And last question for you, Steve, if people want to hear more about this or if they want to get a hold of you, how do they find you?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me directly. I'll respond to a direct email at my Haynes and Boone email, stephen.malm@haynesboone.com. And any sort of an inquiry is welcome. We're entering, as alluded to there, I guess, during the discussion, the time of year for immigration lawyers where we get busy. It's the H-1B lottery season. And this is the time of year where employers are reaching out and they should really be screening their employee populations to assess whether there are any employees that need H-1B sponsorship or if that would be desirable for them.
All right. Well, thanks very much. And thank you, audience. And we'll see you all next week.